She destroyed the test before the plastic had even cooled in her hand. 3 minutes. That was all it took for everything to change. 3 minutes staring at two lines that rewrote her entire future, and then one decision, cold, quiet, final, that she told herself would erase them both. But before we go any further, if you love stories that pull you apart and put you back together differently, subscribe to this channel right now. Because this one, it doesn't just get intense, it gets under your skin and stays there. The night it started, Zara Osei was not supposed to be there. She was not supposed to be on the 14th floor of the Voss building at 11:45 on a Tuesday. She was not supposed to have taken the wrong elevator, turned down the wrong corridor, or pushed open the wrong door looking for the supply closet she needed before her shift ended. But she did all of those things. And what she saw on the other side of that door, she could never unsee it. A man, tall, dark suit, no tie, sleeves rolled to the forearm the way men roll them when they have already won the evening. His back was to her. And pressed against the floor-to-ceiling window in front of him, bathed in the gold and gray light of the city below, was a woman, laughing, beautiful, completely at home in his arms. Zara didn't breathe. She stepped back, pulled the door closed without a sound, stood in the hallway with her back against the wall and her chest clenching with something she could not yet name. She didn't even know him. Not really. Not in any way that counted. Riven Mao was a name you heard before you ever met him. A man whose presence in a building changed the temperature of every room he hadn't yet entered. A billionaire. A name that moved quietly through shadows and made governments nervous. The kind of man who didn't explain himself to anyone. Ever. And Zara Osei was nobody. A contract cleaner. Third shift. Invisible by design. She told herself it didn't matter. She straightened her uniform, picked up her cart, and walked away. She didn't know she was already carrying the one secret that would make her impossible to ignore. And she had no idea he had already seen her face in the reflection of the glass. Her name meant gold in her grandmother's language. She had never felt like it. Zara Osei was 26 years old and had been surviving so long she had forgotten what living felt like. She worked 3 jobs: the night cleaning shift at the Voss building on rotating floors throughout the week, a Saturday shift at a laundry on Carnell Street, and 2 evenings a week waitressing at a dim, forgettable restaurant, where the tips were small and the hours were long. She sent half of everything she earned back home. She kept the rest for rent, food, and the particular brand of exhaustion that comes from never stopping. She had no time for mistakes. Which was why, the Sunday morning after the wrong corridor, and the wrong door, and the wrong man, she was sitting on the cold edge of her bathtub staring at something she had absolutely no framework for. 2 lines. She had been staring at them so long the plastic had warmed in her palm. Her mind was not racing. That was the strange thing. It was completely, terrifyingly still, like a surface of water right before a weight breaks through from below. She thought about her mother who had raised her alone and never once made her feel like a burden, even though Zara knew she had been one. She thought about her tiny room with the window that didn't close all the way. She thought about her bank account. She thought about the man in the window, the woman laughing, the way the city had looked like it belonged to them both. And then she stood up, walked to the bin, and dropped the test inside. No. She reached back in. Picked it up, looked at it one more time. This was not a door she could walk through. Not like this. Not alone. Not with nothing. A child deserved more than survival. A child deserved a mother who was not one broken shift away from losing her room. She wrapped the test in tissue, pushed it to the bottom of the bin, covered it. Done. She washed her hands twice, said nothing to her reflection. Then she picked up her bag and went to work. The truth, the one she could not say out loud even to herself, was simpler and more devastating than any justification she constructed. She had looked at 2 lines on a piece of plastic and felt, just for 1 second, something enormous and terrifying she had not felt in years. Hope. And hope in Zara Osei's life had never once ended well, so she killed it before it could grow. What she could not know was that high above her in the Voss building, in an office that looked out over the entire city like a throne, Riven Mao had not slept since Tuesday night. Not because of business. Not because of the hostile acquisition his legal team had been managing. Not because of the government's watching his shipping routes with fresh and unwelcome interest. He had not slept because of a face in a reflection, a woman in a gray uniform, standing in a hallway outside a door she had opened by mistake. She had looked through that gap for no more than 2 seconds. And in those 2 seconds, a quality in her expression, not shock, not curiosity, not even embarrassment that stopped him cold. Grief. Just a flash. Gone before it had fully arrived. He picked up his phone. Find out who cleans the 14th floor. Third shift. That was the first mistake he had made in a very long time. He just didn't know it yet. The woman came to Zara's door on a Wednesday evening, and she did not knock like someone who expected to be turned away. 3 sharp raps. Certain. Practiced. The knock of someone who had never once been told no and had no intention of starting now. Zara opened the door, still in her work uniform. The woman on the threshold looked like she had been assembled by someone who took wealth very seriously. Ivory coat, structured, not a crease on it. Hair so perfectly placed it looked architectural. Eyes that assessed Zara in under a second and found the result unsurprising. Her name was Sable Vreeland, and she smiled the way very dangerous things smile with the mouth only. Zara Osei. Not a question. May I come in? Zara didn't move. Who are you? Someone doing you a kindness by being here instead of sending someone less pleasant. A pause. She glanced past Zara into the room with the detached curiosity of someone touring a property they had already decided not to buy. I won't take long. Zara stepped aside. Not because she wanted to, because the presence of Sable Vreeland made the air feel pressurized, like the moments before a storm, when even the leaves stop moving. Sable walked in, did not sit, turned, clasped her hands with the precision of someone beginning a prepared speech. I know you were on the 14th floor last Tuesday, she said. I know what you saw, and whatever you are currently thinking about it. A pause that landed like a blade. You should stop. Zara's jaw tightened. I don't know what you're talking about. Of course you don't. The smile again. Patient. You're also intelligent enough to understand that Riven Mao's attention is not a gift. It is a complication, especially for women who have nothing to protect themselves with. The room was very quiet. He's already asked about you, Sable continued. That means you have a few days before something changes in your life that you won't be able to change back. She moved toward the door. Unhurried. Leaving quietly is something you can still choose. Soon that choice may no longer be available. She paused at the door. I've seen what happens to women who get caught in his orbit. A fracture moved through her composure, brief, almost human, gone before Zara could be certain she had seen it. It doesn't end the way they imagine it will. The door clicked shut, like a full stop. Zara stood in her small room and did not move for a long time, because deep in the bottom of her bin, wrapped in tissue, was a secret that turned everything Sable Vreeland had just said, from a warning, into something categorically worse. A countdown. Meanwhile, across the city, Riven opened her file. 3 jobs. No family in the city. No record of anything except a woman who worked without stopping and asked for nothing. He read it twice. Then he did something his right-hand man, Dace Prell, had not seen in 11 years of working beside him. He closed the file without making a decision. She opened that door by mistake, Riven said quietly. And she closed it without saying a word to anyone. Dace waited. That's either very innocent, Riven said, or very calculated. A pause. Find out which. And find out why she looked like that. Dace knew better than to ask what he meant. He simply nodded, left, and said nothing to anyone about the fact that for the first time in a very long time, his employer looked like a man who had lost something he hadn't known he was holding. The summons arrived the following morning, not a phone call, not an email, but a man in a black car, idling outside the laundry on Carnell Street at 7:15, holding a card with 4 words in clean, unadorned type. Mr. Mao would like to meet. She thought about saying no. She weighed it seriously the way you weigh an option when you already know it isn't really one. Then she took off her apron and got in the car. The building Riven used for meetings not meant to be documented was nothing like the Voss Tower. Quieter, older, the kind of building that said, "We have never needed to announce ourselves." She was taken to the 3rd floor, a room with high ceilings and 2 chairs angled toward each other near the window in a way that suggested conversation rather than interrogation, but only just. He was already there. Riven Mao looked different up close. Not smaller, never smaller, but more present. The kind of person whose attention felt physical, like a change in air pressure. He watched her with the focused patience of someone who had already decided to wait as long as necessary. He let the silence settle. Then, "You're not frightened." "I'm frightened," Zara said. "I'm just not going to show you." A muscle shifted at the corner of his jaw, gone before she could read it. "You were on the 14th floor, he said. 9 days ago. You opened a door. By accident. I understand that. It's not what I'm asking about." He watched her steadily. "You saw something, and then you left without telling anyone. Without using it. Why? Because it had nothing to do with me. Most people would have found a way to make it do with them. I'm not most people." Another silence, longer, different. He was looking at her not to evaluate her but to understand something, as though the question had already moved somewhere else and she hadn't caught up yet. "What's your name?" he said. "You already know my name. Your file tells me facts. I'm asking you." The distinction caught in her throat unexpectedly. "Zara," she said. "Zara Osei." He repeated it once. Quietly. The way you repeat something when you are deciding whether to remember it. "Why 3 jobs?" he said. "That's in the file too." "The file says you have 3. It doesn't say why." She looked at him. At the absolute steadiness of him. At the way he seemed to have all the time in the world while making her feel that every second of silence was a small test she was either passing or failing without knowing the criteria. "Because 1 isn't enough," she said. "Enough for what?" This was the moment. She could feel it the way you feel a fork in the road before you see the sign, a subtle shift beneath you, a sense that one direction leads somewhere and the other leads back. She had been about to say to survive. The honest, unvarnished answer that lived just beneath the surface of everything she did. She stopped herself. Because sitting in that room, with those eyes on her, honesty felt like handing something fragile to someone who didn't yet know how to hold it. And she had learned the long, hard way that misplaced honesty was always paid for by the one who offered it. "Enough," she said. "Final. Closed." He studied her a moment longer, then nodded slowly, like she had answered a question she didn't know he'd been asking. "You can go," he said. She stood, moved toward the door. "Zara." She stopped, took one quiet breath first. Then she turned. He watched her from the chair with that unrelenting focus. "Don't lie to me again," he said, quietly, without heat. A statement of fact. Her chest went cold. She left without responding. And in the elevator going down, alone for the first time in an hour, she pressed her back against the wall and tried to understand how he had known. How he had looked at one closed answer and seen straight through to everything she was refusing to say. She couldn't figure it out. Which frightened her far more than the meeting had. She thought it was over. She went back to her shifts. The rhythm of early mornings and late nights. She did not hear from Riven Mao. She did not see Sable Vreeland again. 5 days passed. 6. On the 7th, she almost believed it. Then she arrived at the Voss building for her Thursday night shift, and the supervisor looked up from her clipboard with an expression trying very hard to be neutral. "Your assignment's been changed. Effective tonight. You're on the executive floor." Zara went still. "Which floor?" 22nd. The 22nd floor was not on the standard rotation. It had never been cleaned by contracted third-shift staff. and the look on the supervisor's face made clear she had been given instructions, but no explanations. Zara collected her keycard, rode the elevator, stepped out into a floor that was wide and silent, lit with low, warm light that cost more than it appeared to, carpeted in something that swallowed every footstep completely. At the far end of the corridor, phone lowering the moment he saw her, stood Riven Mao. He ended the call. Waited. Let her walk the full length toward him. She stopped at a professional distance. "I'm supposed to be cleaning," she said. "You are. This floor. I don't normally clean this floor." "No." He held her gaze. "I requested you specifically." The words settled between them with a weight she wasn't sure how to carry. "Why?" she said. "Because I have questions I haven't finished asking." Before she could respond, the glass doors at the end of the corridor opened. 3 people stepped through: a man in a charcoal suit, a woman with a leather portfolio, and behind them, moving like she owned the floor entirely, Sable Vreeland. Sable stopped when she saw Zara. The pause was almost invisible. Then her expression rearranged into something smooth and pleasant and impenetrable. She looked at Zara with the polished indifference of someone acknowledging furniture, then turned to Riven. "I didn't know you'd changed the cleaning schedule." A small smile, then louder, deliberately pitched so the others could hear. "Although given the security concerns last week, perhaps a full review of all contractor access would be wise." She let a beat pass. One does wonder how someone from the third shift rotation ends up on a restricted floor in the first place. The man in the charcoal suit looked up. The woman looked at Zara. The implication was surgical, not an accusation, nothing direct, nothing that could be challenged. Just a suggestion laid with precision. Just enough to make everyone in that corridor wonder. Zara felt the blood leave her face. She looked at the floor. Then a voice, quiet and absolute, cut through everything. "She is here because I requested her." Riven did not raise his voice. He never needed to. "If you have concerns about contractor access, Sable, put them in writing and send them to Dace." A pause, measured and final. "She is not your concern." The corridor went still. Sable held his gaze for 1 second longer than was comfortable. Then, "Of course," she walked away. The others followed. The glass doors closed. Zara stood in the silence with her cleaning cart and her keycard and something she hadn't expected. For the first time in longer than she could remember, someone had stood in front of her and said, "Not her," without hesitation, without calculation, without cost-benefit analysis. She didn't know what to do with it. She wasn't sure she deserved it. But she knew with bone-deep certainty that Sable Vreeland's expression before she walked away had not been embarrassment. It had been the expression of someone quietly and methodically beginning something. She pushed the cart to the end of the corridor and began her work. The movements were automatic. She had cleaned enough rooms in enough buildings to let her hands operate independently while her mind did something else entirely. And what her mind did, in the silence of the 22nd floor, was circle back to that moment. His voice, the 2 words, the absolute flatness with which he had delivered them, like they required no emphasis because they were simply and non-negotiably true. "She is not your concern." She had been dismissed. She had been overlooked. She had been forgotten and underpaid and invisible for so long that she had started to believe invisibility was simply her natural state, a condition rather than a circumstance. Something she had been born to, rather than pushed into. And in 8 seconds, with 8 words, in a corridor, where no one important was watching, Riven Mao had made her visible. She didn't know what to do with that. She wasn't sure she was ready to find out. But she thought about it for the rest of the shift. And when she left the building at 4 in the morning, and the cold air hit her face, and the city was dark and empty around her, she thought about it still. The attack didn't look like one. That was what made it so difficult to see coming. It looked like a mop bucket left at the top of the stairwell. A wet floor on a route she walked every Thursday without thinking. The kind of mundane accident that happened in large buildings and left no trace. Zara was 3 steps from the bottom of the east stairwell when she slipped. There was no time to register at one moment moving. The next the world tilted. The railing came up too late. and the stairs stopped being beneath her. She caught the banister with one hand, swung hard into the wall, and went down on her right side with a force that knocked every breath from her lungs. She lay still for a moment, cataloging, head intact, right arm wrong. Something in her side that wasn't pain yet but would be shortly, the way the worst things always announce themselves seconds after arriving. It was Dace Prell who found her. Riven's shadow, the man who appeared in doorways and disappeared before you could be sure he'd been there. He came through the stairwell door, stopped the instant he saw her, and his controlled expression cracked just slightly at the edges. "Don't move," he said. "I'm fine." "You're not." Already on his phone. "The floor was wet and I—" "The floor," Dace said, in a voice gone very precise and very quiet, "was dry when I checked this stairwell 40 minutes ago." She went still. He looked at her, said nothing more, but the look said everything the words hadn't. A private doctor arrived within 12 minutes, brisk, efficient, someone who had clearly been here before under similar circumstances. He examined her thoroughly, and then he asked her 3 words that were routine to him and anything but to her. She answered, barely above a whisper. The doctor's hand paused on the form he was completing just a fraction of a second, barely perceptible, then continued. He wrote something, capped his pen, and handed the report to Dace without looking at her again. She sat alone in the small room they had brought her to, and understood, with clarity that felt almost chemical, what that form now said. What Riven Mao was about to read. Her chest contracted. Not from the fall. From the knowledge that the secret buried at the bottom of her bin was now written in clean, medical handwriting and traveling toward the one man she could not afford to tell. She had run out of time without ever knowing the clock had started. Across the building, in his office on the 22nd floor, Riven received the report. He read it once, set it down. The room held 3 advisors, Dace, and 2 men at the door. Not one of them spoke. Because Riven Mao had gone completely, utterly still, and in 15 years of watching him operate, not one person in that room had seen his hands grip the edge of a desk the way they were gripping it now. Slowly, he looked up. Who had access to that stairwell tonight? His voice was perfectly level, perfectly controlled. That was the part that frightened everyone in the room. They came for her at dawn. Not with aggression that would have been easier to resist. They came with paperwork. A termination notice on company letterhead, handed to her by a woman from building HR who couldn't meet her eyes, and a security escort waiting in the corridor with the patient stillness of someone whose morning had been cleared specifically for this. Effective immediately. Contract withdrawn. Please return your keycard. She read it in the doorway of the room she had been resting in since the fall. She didn't need to ask who had arranged it. The efficiency, the speed, the hour, the clean administrative language that made something calculated look entirely procedural had only one signature, Sable Vreeland. And whoever in this building she had reached first. Zara handed back the keycard, signed the form, picked up her bag. She was 3 steps from the exit when Dace materialized in the corridor ahead of her. He looked at the bag on her shoulder, at her face, at the termination notice she still held. Don't go anywhere, he said quietly. I've been terminated. I'm aware. He was already on his phone, half-turned, voice dropping to something she couldn't hear. She waited. Not because she'd been asked to, because she was tired and her arm ached, and she had nowhere pressing to be now that she had just lost 1/3 of her income before 7 in the morning. 90 seconds later, Dace ended the call and looked at her. He wants to see you. I no longer work here. He's aware of that too. She almost laughed. It came out shorter than a laugh. And if I say no? Dace's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. He said to tell you. A pause, and she could see it cost him something to relay this, that he'll come to you. Zara thought about the secret in her bin, the medical report, the termination notice cooling in her hand. She turned around and walked back inside. He was waiting at the side entrance. No car, no Dace. Him, Riven Mao, standing in the rain that had begun sometime in the last hour, no umbrella, no announcement, simply present. When she came through the door and stopped at the sight of him, he looked at her with an expression she didn't yet have a name for. "You didn't have to come down," she said. "Yes," he said. The rain fell quietly between them. "You read the report," she said. "Yes." She met his eyes. "Then you already know more than I was ready to tell you." "Yes." And then before she could move or decide, "Come inside, Zara." Not a command, not a request. Something that existed precisely between the two. She went inside. He took her to his office on the 22nd floor. Not the meeting room with the long table. His actual office behind a door with no handle on the outside. That detail alone told her something. This was not a meeting. This was a reckoning. He stood at the window with his back to her for a moment, looking at the city the way he always looked at it, like it was something he was responsible for. Then he turned. Placed the medical report on the desk between them. Did not push it toward her. Simply put it there, visible, acknowledged. "Tell me," he said, "what you were going to do." "I wasn't going to do anything. That was the point. You were going to disappear. I was going to make a decision that kept you out of something you didn't choose and didn't deserve to be part of. That decision," he said carefully, "was not yours alone to make." The words landed hard. She had built an argument for herself that was rational and compassionate and practically watertight, and she had believed it completely right up until this moment, when he said it out loud, and it sounded like what it actually was. An assumption. Unilateral. Made in fear. "I saw you," she said. Her voice was steady. She made it steady. "On the 14th floor. With her." A shadow crossed his face. "I know what I saw," she continued. "I'm not asking you to explain it. I'm telling you why I made the choice I made. I looked at that, and I looked at my life, and I decided," her throat tightened, but her voice held, "that bringing something that vulnerable into the middle of whatever that was not something I was willing to do." A long silence. "What you saw," Riven said, his voice lower, stripped of its usual control in a way that was almost imperceptible, but to Zara, watching him as carefully as she had since the moment she walked in, was unmistakable, was my sister. The world reorganized itself, quietly, without drama, but completely. She was saying goodbye, he continued. She was leaving the country the next morning. She is the only person I have ever allowed into this building for a reason that had nothing to do with business. A pause that cost him something. "I don't tell people that. I'm telling you because you made a decision based on something you misunderstood. And before anything else happens, you need to know what you actually saw." Silence. "I destroyed the test," she said finally. Small words. "I buried it. I told myself it was the right thing. I think I was just terrified." "Of what?" She looked up. "Of wanting something I had no right to want." He moved from the window, crossed to her in the deliberate way he moved through everything, each step a choice, and crouched before her chair so they were level, eye to eye, no desk between them. "Zara." His voice was low and entirely unguarded. She understood suddenly why he kept this version of himself so tightly controlled, because unguarded, Riven Mao was devastating. "That child is not a mistake." Her eyes burned. "I know," she whispered. "That's what made it so hard to—" The door opened. Dace entered with the expression of someone who had weighed the cost of interrupting against the cost of not interrupting. "We have a problem." Riven did not look away from her. "Not now, sir." The specific register he used when things had moved beyond manageable. "They've taken her." Now Riven stood, turned. The unguarded version of him sealed itself away completely and instantly. "Taken who?" "Sable." A breath. "They left a message." "Say it." Dace looked at Zara, then back at Riven. "They said, 'We know about the woman. We know what she's carrying. Deliver her to us by midnight.'" A pause that sat in the room like a held breath. "Or we take the decision out of everyone's hands." Zara's blood went cold. She had spent her entire life making herself invisible enough that no one would have reason to use her. and somewhere out there, someone already had. The word she kept returning to the one that kept arriving and refusing to be set aside was carrying. They knew what she was carrying, which meant they knew something she had tried to destroy, something she had buried and sealed and decided did not exist. She looked at Riven, at the hard, controlled line of his jaw, at the way he had already shifted into operational mode, the part of him that assessed threats and neutralized them with the detached precision of someone who had done this many times before. "They won't wait until midnight," she said quietly. He looked at her. "People who send messages like that," she said, "don't give real deadlines. The deadline is the distraction. The real move is whatever they do while you're focused on the clock." She held his gaze. "My mother told me that once, about the people who came for her family." A pause. "She said they always gave a window and moved before it closed." The room was very still. Dace looked at Riven. Riven looked at Zara. And in that look, in that particular, specific, recalibrating look, she understood something she hadn't expected to understand yet. That she was not simply a problem he was managing. That whatever she was to him had already moved somewhere past that, somewhere he hadn't fully named yet either. "We move now," Riven said, his eyes still on hers. "Not at midnight." "Who are they?" she said. Her voice came out steadier than she had any right to. Riven turned, and she could see him calculating how much to tell her. She had been on the receiving end of that particular calculation before. Men deciding what she could handle. She was done with it. "All of it," she said. "Not the version you think I can manage. All of it." Something in him shifted quick, almost reluctant, like he hadn't expected to be read that precisely. He nodded once, settled on the edge of his desk, and he told her. The organization that had taken Sable had done so as a message. Sable was adjacent to him. Her loss cost him reputation, alliances, the careful political architecture of a life built on strategic proximity. But she was manageable. She was not the person who would cost him everything. That was Zara. Because what Zara carried was not simply a child. It was a bloodline. And bloodlines in Riven's world were not personal. They were political. "Your mother," he said, watching her face. "Her name was Neka Ose." "Yes. Before she left the continent and built a different life, her name was Neka Adayes Nofor." He paused. "Do you know that name?" She didn't. But she watched his face when he said it and understood from the weight he carried it with that she was supposed to. The Nuofor line controlled trade infrastructure across 6 countries for 40 years. He said, visibly, politically, they were foundational. And 15 years ago, a rival faction dismantled them. Systematically. They believed the line was ended. Zara's chest was tight. "My mother never told me." "She hid you. She gave you a different name, a different history, moved you far enough that no one looking would think to look there." He looked at her steadily. "She didn't tell you because telling you was the one thing that would have made you findable." The room was quiet. "She died 4 years ago," Zara said. Her voice was careful, not fragile, just careful. "She went to her grave without telling me." She stopped, rebuilt the sentence. "She let me believe my whole life that I was nobody. To protect you." "She let me believe I was nobody," Zara said again, quietly, "so I would be safe." An emotion moved through her chest, older and more complex than grief. A reckoning she had no word for, the emotion that arrives when you discover that a wound you thought you understood had a completely different origin than the one you'd assigned it. A love so large and suffocating it had felt, her whole life, like the absence of it. Then she looked up. "The child. They want the child because a child of the No-4 bloodline, born into my resources and my reach, would be the single most significant consolidation of power this region has seen in 20 years. The faction that dismantled your family has spent every day since making sure that was never possible." Silence. "So I'm not a bargaining chip," she said. "No. I'm a threat. You always were. You just didn't know it." She sat with that. Then, "You could have had Dace handle this. Had me moved. Managed the situation. Kept the assets safe. Her voice was deliberate. Why are you still here, in this room, telling me yourself? He looked at her without hesitation. Because you are not an asset. Then what am I? The words hung in the air. Perhaps the most honest question she had ever asked. Another person stripped of every layer of self-protection she had built over 26 years. Riven stood, crossed to her, stopped close enough that she could see the exact point where his composure ended and the man beneath it began, and held her gaze with an expression so undefended she had to resist the impulse to look away from the sheer weight of it. You are the first person, he said quietly, who has ever sat in that chair and told me the truth before I asked, who looked at everything I am and didn't try to use it or survive it. You tried to protect something from me. Not yourself, something far smaller and more important than yourself. His jaw tightened slightly. And I have been trying to understand, since the moment Dace handed me that report, how someone with nothing decided the right thing to do was give me less. Her eyes burned. Because you had everything, she said, and everything you have is dangerous. Her voice broke. Just once. She brought it back. I didn't want to hand the most important thing I've ever been responsible for to a world that would turn it into a weapon. I understand that. Softly. And I need you to hear me when I say I would spend the rest of my life making sure that doesn't happen. He reached for her hand. Not as a gesture. Simply took it the way you take something you have decided to be responsible for. But I cannot do that if you keep trying to disappear. Before she could find words, Dace's voice cut through the air beyond. Riven, they've moved up the deadline. We're out of time. The room changed instantly. Riven's hand stayed around hers for one more second. Then he straightened. His composure locked back into place like armor that had never come off. Stay here, he said. She held his gaze. Please, he added, quietly. Just for her. Then he crossed to the exit. She sat in the chair for exactly 4 minutes after it closed. Long enough to hear the sound of organized movement in the corridor outside. Long enough to feel the particular quality of a building shifting from one thing into something else entirely. Long enough to understand that staying being kept safe and separate and managed was not something she was built for anymore. Maybe she had never been. Maybe all those years of making herself small and invisible had not been her nature but her survival strategy, and survival strategies, once the danger that created them had passed, became cages. She stood. She straightened her jacket. She thought about her mother, who had spent her whole life hiding something enormous to protect the person she loved most, who had watched that person grow up believing they were nobody and said nothing, and chosen it, because she believed invisibility was the only armor available. Her mother had chosen silence as armor. It had worked, for a time, but armor was not a life. I'd choose differently, she thought. She did not stay. She waited exactly 4 minutes, long enough to hear organized movement in the corridors outside, boots on carpet, voices dropping to operational registers. Then she walked out. Dace was in the corridor. His expression said several things in rapid succession, none of which he said aloud. He fell into step beside her. Where is he? She said. You're supposed to be. Just tell me. Where is he? A pause. Then, War Room. 2 floors down. The War Room was exactly what the name suggested, a large space converted efficiently and without sentiment into an operational center. Screens on 2 walls. 6 people she hadn't seen before, all with the focused energy of individuals who had trained for situations like this one. Maps. Communication equipment. A countdown in red numerals. Riven was at the center table, issuing instructions in the low, rapid cadence of someone who would not repeat himself. He looked up when she entered. His jaw tightened. Zara, I know where they are, she said. The room went quiet. She had not known she was going to say it until she did. But the moment she had walked through the door and seen the maps, the city and grid coordinates, the marked locations, the cluster of pins in the eastern district near the water, a recognition fired. A place her mother had mentioned once, years ago, in passing. A warehouse, a name, a detail sitting unused in her memory for a decade that was now the most relevant thing in the room. Sit down, Riven said. I know where they are. The Fenwick Road site, by the dry docks. My mother mentioned it once. She said it was where the people who came for her family used to operate. She said they never changed locations because they believed no one living knew. She held his gaze. No one living. Except me. Because she told me, and I didn't know it mattered. The silence in the room had the quality of people recalibrating very quickly. Riven looked at her for a long moment. An expression crossed his face beyond surprise, a recognition that arrived too fast and landed too deep to be simple. He turned to Dace's second in command. Pull the Fenwick Road site. Everything we have. The man was already moving. You should not be in this room, Riven said to her. Low. Not cold. Something more complicated than cold. I'm aware. She held her ground. But this is my family's history being used as a weapon, and they took someone because of me, and I am done disappearing. I told you that. He looked at her for a long time, then he said two words she hadn't expected. I know. Not concession. Recognition. He was looking at her with a steadiness that had moved past calculation and arrived somewhere else entirely, somewhere he was choosing to stand without knowing its boundaries. Stay behind me, he said. Not for my sake. His eyes held hers. For theirs. He meant the child. He didn't say it. He didn't need to. She nodded. The operation moved fast. 12 minutes from the confirmation of the Fenwick Road site to the convoy leaving the building. She rode in the second vehicle with Dace, who did not speak but whose presence beside her had the quiet, steadying quality of someone who had decided she was worth protecting, and done so without fanfare. The dry dock district at night was all rust and shadow and the distant sound of water. The warehouse was large and dark, and looked abandoned in the way things look abandoned when they are trying to appear so. The operation was swift and surgical, and watching it from the vehicle, she understood what Riven had built around himself, not simply wealth or power, but precision, the kind that protects people, that builds a world within the world where certain kinds of harm cannot reach. She had spent her life outside that world. She had believed she didn't need it. She was beginning to understand those two things were not the same as being right. Sable was brought out first. Shaken but composed, the composure of someone for whom composure is load-bearing. She crossed the space and stopped in front of Zara. For a moment neither of them spoke. Then Sable said, quietly, They told me what you are. A pause. What you're carrying. Her eyes held something that was not the cold calculation Zara had seen before. I didn't know. When I came to your door, I didn't know any of it. I was protecting something I thought I understood. Her jaw tightened. I was wrong about what needed protecting. It wasn't an apology, but it was something. Then Riven came through the door and crossed to her immediately. He found her face in the dark and the composure cracked just at the edges, just barely. You're all right, he said, quieter than he intended. I'm all right, she said. He held her gaze a moment longer than necessary. Then he placed his palm very gently, very deliberately, against the side of her face, just for a second. In that second, Zara Osei, who had spent 26 years invisible and expendable, and one broken shift from losing everything, felt seen, not because of bloodlines or political consequence, seen by him, specifically, completely. His hand dropped, his expression closed. He turned to Dace and the operation continued, but she stayed where she was for a moment longer. Because that 1 second had been the most honest thing either of them had said to each other. She thought about all the ways she had tried not to be here. The bin, the tissue, the decision she had made in a cold bathroom while the city slept, and she told herself she was being strong. She thought about Sable appearing at her door like a warning she should have heeded. She thought about the termination notice, the rain, the stairwell, the report in his hands. She had tried so many times to disappear. And every time, something had kept her tethered. Not him, not his resources or his reach or the complicated, layered gravity of the world he occupied. Something smaller. Something that had been there from the moment she had looked through a gap in a door and felt something she had no right to feel about a man she didn't know. Recognition. The dangerous, inconvenient, entirely unreasonable certainty that some people are simply yours before you have a single fact to justify it. She had destroyed the evidence of it. She had buried it twice. She had tried to walk away from it in the rain. It had found her anyway. Some things, she understood now, were not built to stay hidden. Not because the world forced them into the light, but because they were simply too alive to stay buried for long. She walked back to the vehicle, sat beside Dace in silence. And for the first time in 26 years, she did not try to talk herself out of what she felt. 3 days later, the world was quiet again. The faction at Fenwick Road had been dismantled with the thoroughness Riven applied to everything he decided to address. The threat was gone. The city continued its indifferent business, knowing none of it. Zara sat on the wide ledge of the 22nd floor window and watched the city below and tried to find the thread of what came next. She heard him before she heard the door. He came in, closed it behind him, stood looking at her with his thinking expression deeply internal, composing something he had been working toward for a while. "You're leaving," he said. "Not a question." "I haven't decided," she said. "You've been deciding since the dry docks." He moved to stand beside the window, not above her, beside her, at the same height. She noticed the deliberateness of it. "I know what it looks like when you're deciding something. You go very still." "I need to rebuild things," she said. "Not an excuse. A fact. I found out 3 days ago that my entire history is different from what I believed. My mother kept something from me my whole life that changed everything I thought I knew about myself." She paused. "I need to stand in that for a while before I can stand anywhere else." He accepted this. She could feel him doing it, not readily, not without cost, but genuinely. "I know," he said. "I'm not running. I'm not destroying anything this time." She looked at him. "I'm asking for something I've never actually had. Which is time that belongs to me. Not to survival. Not to 3 jobs and everything I owe everyone else." A pause. "Time to understand who I am, when I know the whole truth of it." He was quiet for a long moment. Then, "I'll be here." Simple. Unadorned. The kind of thing he said only when he meant it entirely. "I believe that," she said. She slid off the ledge. They were close now, that particular distance they had maintained since the beginning, never crossed and never ignored. She looked up at him. "There's something I need to ask." "Ask it." "The medical report. You read it before the rain, before the war room, before all of it." She held his gaze. "And you didn't use it. You didn't make it a reason or a claim. You had something that gave you leverage over me, and you simply chose not to use it." He was quiet. "Nobody has ever done that," she said. "That's not leverage," he said. "That's your life." Her throat tightened. "Exactly. That's why it mattered." He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. Slowly, he placed something on the ledge between them. She looked at it. The air left her lungs. The pregnancy test. The one she had wrapped in tissue and buried weeks ago, broken where she had snapped it in that first impulse of fear. The 2 lines still visible. "You kept it," she whispered. "From the day after Dace found your address." His voice was very quiet. "I went to your room myself. I needed to understand something about you I couldn't get from a file. It was in the bin. And I couldn't leave it there." A pause. "I don't have a clean explanation for that." She sat with it for a long time, turning it in her hands. At the 2 lines. At the break down the middle. At the small, enormous thing it was. "I've been choosing you," he said. The words came out stripped of everything except what they were. "Since the moment I saw your face in that glass, before your name, before the report, before any of it. I have been making decisions in your direction, and I think you deserve to know that." He held the test out to her. "I'm not asking you to stay. I'm telling you that wherever you go, and however long it takes, I will still be choosing you." Her eyes filled. She did not stop them this time. She took it from him, held it in both hands and looked at it, the 2 lines, the break in the middle, the thing it represented that she had tried so hard to make into nothing. Then she looked up at him. "I'll come back," she said. I do, he said. Don't make me say how long. I won't, she breathed. Just breathed, in the quiet of the office above the city. Then she stepped forward, closed the distance she had never crossed, and she held on to him one moment, just one with the quiet, deliberate grip of someone who is not saying goodbye. She was saying, I'll be back. Save my place. He held her like someone who already had. When she finally stepped away and moved to the door, she paused at the frame. Riven, yes, your sister. She did not look back. Does she know about me? A pause. And then something she had never heard from him, rare and small, and entirely genuine. A quiet sound of amusement. She's been asking about you since the night after. Zara smiled. The first full, unguarded smile in longer than she could remember. Then she walked out. For the first time in 26 years, the future felt like something she was walking toward rather than simply surviving until. She was Zara Nofer Osei. She was the gold her grandmother's language had always promised she would be. And she was just getting started. If this story reached something in you, if you felt every moment of it, subscribe now, because the next one is already waiting, and it might just break you open in the best possible way.